All right, Tenafly, if you're asking if our market is finally cooling off, you are definitely asking the right questions because that's the question everybody is asking me. We're going to answer that in this video. By the way, I help people in Tenafly all the time, buying and selling. You could reach me at 201-292-0011, or you could book an appointment. All the information is in the description below. Let's get started. So the dynamics of our market are pretty consistent. So we're still seeing prices remain elevated. However, we are seeing homes stay on the market a bit longer, and that's been a very consistent trend. And that trend doesn't show any indication of slowing down. However, buyer behavior has definitely move. So I want to talk about that with you guys. Prices are remaining strong. In fact, the median price for Tenafly, and this is November 2025, so I'm always going back to get the full month, is at 1.7 million. So that's showing us that we have sustained demand. The annual growth is very, very high. It's way above what the national average is. And our sale to list price ratio, which is over here, that's also very, very high. That doesn't mean every house is going to get that same effect, and that's where the buyer behavior and understanding how that's shifting is really important because houses are staying on the market longer and you're also having more price reductions, right? So with homes taking longer to sell than they were before, buyers are not rushing for results, right? So they're analyzing very thoroughly, they're comparing properties, they're revisiting the listings, right? They're not just boom stepping in and buying necessarily right away. So this shift is points to more stress on the sellers to be pricing correctly and for the right presentation. So for instance, it's not just like, oh, let's just throw a house on the market and sell it. Preparation is going to be your friend as a seller in this market. Inventory still remains very tight. There are limited listings that's in our market. We are still seeing what we call more of a seller's market than a buyer's market, and that I always say is all about supply and demand. So in looking at our market, I'm constantly trying to see if we are back to where we were before COVID, and that's when we would have just an equal sort of neutral market, not a buyer's market, not a seller's market. And that's all about how much inventory we have, which is a combination of the inventory and the demand and how fast it's selling, the rate at which it's selling. But we have been in a recession as far as units being sold. And that's because people who are in Tenafly tend to stay, or they stay for a long time and they don't have a lot of options. Essentially, they're not sure where they want to go. And of course, they don't want to give up their very comfy mortgage rate. So we are, but the lower rates we have right now are very interesting because nationally we're seeing purchase applications consistently above last year. So when we can look at when purchase applications are rising, that is the biggest indication that we will have strong demand in the next few months. And we also are assuming that those purchase applications or mortgage approvals, you should say, are also coming from perhaps sellers who are also looking to sell their home. So right now we are lower, you could see lower 6.1, and it was at least 7.3 this time last year, which is incredible. Remember, like every point that a mortgage rate moves, it affects the buyer's buying power by 10%. So the Tenafly buyer is extremely savvy. They are data driven. I always say to my sellers, I want you to think like a buyer to win like a seller, and the data will help you do that. You have to be data driven. The buyers are looking at comparables and trends and research. They're looking at what's on the market, why isn't it moving, how many days on the market. In fact, one of the first things that buyers will ask us when we put a house on the market is, how long has this house been on the market? And that is really important to understand. Overpricing is also going to be really important. Sellers, I understand you want the most amount of money the market will give you. You also have to really understand sort of where the market will actually step up and place a bid, because we as listing agents, we can't negotiate a bid we don't have, right? So it's important to note that the buyer today is not necessarily going to place a bid on a house if the house is several points above what the buyer thinks is fair market value. So if you remember in one of the earlier slides, I showed you that the list to sale ratio, that means how close is the sold price to where that house was originally listed, that's really high. It's still on average above 100%. So what that means is that buyers are not offering 5% or 10% below the list price. So that's why it's really important that you don't necessarily overprice. However, if you are on the market for longer than you should be, you can course correct and you still have enough demand where the buyers will step up. So do yourself a favor and be very analytical, because that's how your buyers are being. All right, so what this means for you guys as sellers is it's definitely precision over guesswork. Testing the market is better if we do that off market, and I do that with my clients a lot where they want to test the market. So when we want to test the market, I say, you know what, let's try an off market strategy before we go to market. And that gives us that test where it doesn't count against us. It doesn't clock days on the market. We are all about presentation. It's so important for buyers to feel like your house was very well taken care of and it's flawless. That's why we use our value up method to help all of our clients get more money for their house. And then, of course, strategic positioning, which is to attract the right buyer, you have to be able to do all those things, right? They have to have the emotional connection and they have to feel like there's value in that pricing, and that has everything to do with how well you've taken care of the house, how well you price it, and of course all the marketing that goes into that house. All right, so for buyers, time is definitely on your side more right now than it was before, right? However, if a house goes up right priced and it's presented and marketed correctly, it's gonna fly. So you really do need to be educated and understand what's going on in the market. You're gonna make data-driven decisions, and of course, there will be a little bit more inventory most likely coming for this spring, but not a lot. You're not going to see this big reprieve, right? So my suggestion to buyers is typically to be very, very, very smart. Go back and look at things that have sold, understand if you feel like you missed something, and so you're prepared when that right house comes, you're going to jump on it, all right? So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a Tenafly Market update. I am Stacy Esser, again, 201-292-0011. Or you can book one-on-ones with me, and the description is below. So we are not seeing a shift in the market, to answer the question. However, we are seeing buyers have a little bit more time, and buyers are being a little bit more picky about what they're doing, what they're buying, and a little more price sensitive, but not yet the shift that might be happening in other parts of the country. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.